I shouldn't remember the way her perfume clung to the car upholstery, but I do. Sharp at first, then softer, like it had mixed with the faint sweetness of wine and the warmth of her skin. She laughed once, low and unguarded, before her head tilted against the window. 45 and untouchable in the office, she suddenly looked human. I shouldn't have stared as long as I did at the curve of her mouth when she finally grew quiet, but I couldn't help myself. Her name was Elena. To me, she had always been this untouchable figure, poised in meetings, words measured, her eyes quick to catch mistakes I hadn't noticed. She carried herself like someone who didn't need anyone, least of all me. But in that back seat, under the half-flickering street lamp, her hand slipped against mine when I tried to steady her. She didn't pull away. She just breathed soft, like she hadn't realized she'd let me hold it a little too long. "Sorry," I muttered, my voice catching on itself. She gave a half-smile, eyes still closed. "Don't apologize. I might fall if you let go." It was a joke, but not really. And the way she said it, like there was more weight to those words than the wine she'd been drinking, sat heavy in the space between us. The drive was quiet after that. My chest felt too small, every breath too loud. I noticed ridiculous things. The pulse at her throat when the street light caught her profile, the way her hair had come undone from its usual neatness, strands brushing her cheek. When I'd pulled up outside her place, she stirred, stretching like the night had made her bones stiff. "I'm fine now," she said, though she leaned on the door longer than she should have. I hurried around to her side, steadying her with a hand at her arm. "You don't have to, I know," I said, cutting in too quickly. "But I want to." Her eyes lingered on me for a second too long. It wasn't gratitude exactly. Something else flickered there, something I didn't have the nerve to name. Inside her house, the silence felt different. Heavy, but not uncomfortable. The kind that dared me to speak, dared me to move. She set her keys on the counter and leaned against it, watching me more than she should have. "You didn't have to come in," she said softly. "I know," I repeated. My throat was dry. Her laugh was faint, almost private. "You keep saying that." The moment stretched. I found myself noticing the glow of the lamp against her skin, the faint tremor in her fingers when she brushed her hair back, the quiet rise and fall of her chest as if she, too, was waiting for something she couldn't admit. I shouldn't have stepped closer. But I did. The floor creaked under me, and her eyes tracked every inch. "Elena," I started, not sure where the words were supposed to end. She tilted her head, lips parting as if to answer, but then, a sound broke it. The creak of another door at the far end of the hall. Heavy footsteps shifting against the wooden floor. Her body went rigid. Her gaze flicked past me, sharp, alert. And just like that, the air changed, charged, trembling, waiting to split open. The footsteps faded down the hall. A door closed, firm but distant, and the house fell quiet again. Elena's shoulders loosened just slightly, but her eyes stayed fixed on the empty space, as though the silence itself carried weight. "That's my son," she said finally, her voice low, almost embarrassed. "He's staying here for a while. Between jobs." I nodded, though the thought stuck in my throat. She was a mother. Of course she was. I'd known it in passing, but standing here in her dim kitchen, with her hair loose and her cheeks faintly flushed, the reminder felt like a line drawn right in front of me. She caught my expression and smirked faintly, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "You look surprised." I hesitated, my tongue clumsy. "I don't usually see you like this. Outside the office, I mean." Her laugh was small, weary. "That's probably for the best. At work I get to be polished. Here." She waved a hand at herself, the undone blouse buttons, the faint mess of hair. "Here I'm just tired. Human." I wanted to tell her she looked better like this. Softer. More real. But the words wouldn't form without sounding too much like the truth. Instead, I leaned against the counter, close enough to feel the faint brush of her sleeve against mine. The contact was accidental, should have been, but neither of us moved away. She glanced at me, then down at the space where our arms almost touched. "You're young," she murmured, not accusing, not dismissing, just stating it like it was a fact that couldn't be ignored. I swallowed. "And you're not old." Her laugh was startled this time, genuine enough to crease the corners of her eyes. That's one way to put it. But when her hand came up to cover her mouth, I noticed how her fingers lingered at her lips, how the gesture slowed, as if she'd suddenly remembered I was watching. "I didn't mean, I know," she cut in softly. The pause that followed was heavy. I studied the kitchen clock just to stop myself from staring too openly, but I still caught the way she shifted closer, her hip brushing mine for the briefest moment. "Elena," I started, but her name came out as more of a whisper than I intended. Her gaze flicked to mine, steady but unreadable. Then, just as quickly, she looked away, busying herself with the kettle though she didn't turn it on. "You should probably go soon," she said, her voice steady but her hand trembling just enough that I noticed. I didn't move. Couldn't. The faint scent of her hair drifted toward me when she bent slightly, the warmth of her shoulder brushing against mine again, longer this time, not accidental. And still, either of us stepped back. The kettle sat untouched, the silence thick, and when her fingers grazed mine on the counter, it wasn't clumsy. It was deliberate. Barely a touch, but enough to anchor us both in a moment we shouldn't have shared, but did. The silence stretched longer than I expected. My chest thudded in my ears, and I noticed the faint tremor of my hands when I finally let them fall from the counter. She was standing just a few feet away, leaning lightly against the island, her eyes tracking mine as if she could read every thought I hadn't spoken. Then, her phone buzzed. She froze mid-breath, staring at it as if it had betrayed her. I glanced down to see a text flashing across the screen. "Are you still out? Dinner's cold." Her fingers hovered over the phone. She hesitated, then swiped it away without answering. I wanted to ask who it was, but I didn't. The moment felt fragile enough already, and neither of us wanted to shatter it with words. I stepped closer, just enough for her warmth to brush my arm again. The air between us thickened, electric. She glanced up, eyes half-lidded, and I felt my pulse spike as if it were betraying me. "Do you want some water?" I asked, my voice uneven, trying to anchor myself. She shook her head, a soft smile tugging at her lips, almost mischievous. "No." "But you—" She let her words trail, just far enough to tease, not enough to finish. Our eyes met, and suddenly the space between us didn't feel safe. I wanted to close it, to let my lips brush hers, but some invisible line held me back. She seemed to feel it too, her breath shallow, a subtle catch in her chest. "Don't," I whispered, not sure if I meant her or myself. Her hand lifted almost unconsciously, hovering near mine on the countertop. Our fingers brushed, light, accidental, yet lingering, and I felt the electricity course through both of us. I wanted to pull her closer, wanted to erase the inches between us, but my mind screamed at me, "Stop. Think. Don't." She caught my hesitation and mirrored it, stepping just enough closer that our shoulders touched lightly. The brush of her body against mine made my skin feel alive in a way I hadn't expected. I caught the faint scent of her perfume again, soft, intoxicating, impossibly familiar. A creak on the staircase made us both jump. The thought of someone walking in, someone noticing, made my chest tighten. But even with the risk, she didn't move away. If anything, she shifted closer, a subtle, daring invitation hidden in the tilt of her head and the warmth of her hand near mine. I swallowed hard, trying to convince myself to pull back, to respect boundaries. But she was too close now, the gravity between us too strong to resist entirely. Her lips parted slightly as if to speak, or maybe to inhale me in, and I caught my own breath. The world seemed to narrow, heartbeat to heartbeat, to the brush of her shoulder, the faint tremor of her hand, the space between us charged with everything we weren't saying. And then, she stepped just a fraction closer, close enough that my chest brushed hers, close enough that resisting suddenly felt impossible. We didn't speak. We didn't move. But the air between us hummed with unspoken promises, desire, and the weight of everything we couldn't admit. Yet, the room felt smaller all of a sudden, like the walls had leaned in just to eavesdrop on us. I could hear the faint hum of the refrigerator, the soft scrape of her shoe against the tile, but nothing else mattered. Only her. Only the way she leaned slightly toward me, weight unspoken but deliberate. "Elena!" My voice was low, rougher than I intended. She turned her head just enough to catch my gaze, eyes wide but not alarmed, more like waiting, testing. "I can't." I swallowed hard, my chest tight. "I shouldn't." Her hand lifted without thinking, brushing a strand of hair from my forehead. The motion was gentle, deliberate, and it sent a shiver straight down my spine. I wanted to lean in, wanted to feel the curve of her cheek against mine, but I hesitated, caught between reason and the ache I couldn't name. "You shouldn't what?" she whispered, her lips dangerously close to mine. The words hung in the air, soft and intimate, like a dare. I could feel the heat radiating off her, smell the faint traces of her perfume mingling with the warmth of her skin. My fingers itched to lift, to trace the line of her jaw, to anchor myself against her. And yet, I stayed still, afraid, guilty, thrilled all at once. She stepped closer, her hand sliding from my hair to my shoulder, leaning just enough that the light brush of her body against mine made my knees go weak. Her breath hitched slightly, and I realized we were holding our own quiet rhythm, heartbeats syncing without sound. "I shouldn't feel this," she admitted, voice trembling, almost breaking. "And yet," she trailed off, letting her hand linger on my chest, thumb brushing against the fabric of my shirt. I wanted to confess everything, how I had thought of her when I shouldn't have, how I had imagined moments like this over and over, how my entire body ached for her, but the words caught in my throat. Instead, I let my forehead rest just shy of hers, a whisper away from a kiss, a sigh away from losing all restraint. Her eyes fluttered closed for a heartbeat, then snapped open, catching mine in a gaze that could burn through steel. "Do you feel it too?" she asked, voice barely audible, yet somehow commanding. "Yes," I breathed. One word, and it carried all the weight I hadn't dared speak. The world narrowed further. I could feel her pulse in her neck, the faint tremor of her fingers on my chest, the soft press of her hip against mine. Everything screamed for motion, for closure, but the fear of consequences kept me suspended, dangling on the edge of what we both wanted but couldn't yet claim. Then her lips parted slightly, a silent invitation, and my breath caught in my throat. My hand twitched toward her face, almost touching, almost sealing the moment. And the door handle rattled. We froze. The impossible, delicate thread between us hung in the balance. One breath, one movement, and everything could shatter, or ignite. The door clicked open just a fraction, and I froze, my chest tightening as if it had been squeezed. Footsteps lingered, hesitant, and then a voice, soft, accusing, impossible to ignore. "Elena?" Her eyes widened, a flicker of panic crossing her face. My body tensed involuntarily as she took a step back, her hand brushing mine in the process. The contact was accidental, or maybe not, but it sent sparks along my skin, making my fingers tremble despite the fear. "It's nothing," she said quickly, her voice a notch too bright, too fast. But the corner of her mouth twitched, betraying her calm. "Nothing?" The voice came again, sharper this time. "I thought I heard you two talking?" My gaze caught hers. For a moment it was silent, a heartbeat stretched, taut as a wire. I could feel her breath against me, quick and shallow, the warmth radiating through the small space between us. I wanted to step closer, wanted to shield her, wanted to tell her it was only me, but the danger of being caught stopped me. Her hand lifted again, brushing a stray hair from her face, but this time her fingers lingered near my jaw. I could feel the tension in her arm, the quiver in her wrist. She didn't pull away. She couldn't. She began, her voice trembling now. "I didn't mean for anyone to hear. I didn't. She stopped. Her words caught in the air, unspoken but heavy. I felt it too, the truth we'd both been dancing around, the desire that had grown reckless in silence. My hand itched to reach for hers, to cradle her cheek, to finally close the space between us, but I didn't. Instead, I swallowed, letting my chest rise and fall slowly, trying to steady the heat coursing through me. She shifted closer, her hip brushing mine, almost a reassurance, almost a challenge. The proximity was dangerous, thrilling, and it made my pulse spike. "I shouldn't," she whispered, just barely audible, her lips trembling as if she might confide everything, if only for a second. "And yet?" I murmured, leaning just enough that my forehead nearly touched hers. The scent of her hair enveloped me, soft, intoxicating, impossible to ignore. Her eyes flicked away for a fraction of a second, then back. "And yet," she repeated, letting her hand slide along the counter until it hovered near mine, fingertips brushing in a subtle, electric connection. The voice at the door had faded, replaced by silence, but the tension now felt heavier than ever. We both knew the truth had changed everything. What had been safe, playful, and impossible now teetered on the edge of reckless. I could feel her heartbeat through the thin fabric of her blouse, rapid and erratic, matching my own. Every instinct screamed to close the distance, to claim the moment before the world intervened again. She leaned closer, almost imperceptibly, a whisper of breath against my lips. And in that instant, the choice hung between us: risk everything, or retreat before the inevitable pulled us both over the edge. The room seemed to shrink around us, every sound muted except the steady thrum of our own hearts. Elena's hand lingered near mine, just inches apart, and I could feel the warmth radiating off her skin even without touching. Every instinct screamed forward, every rational thought whispered to pull back. "I can't. I shouldn't," I murmured, my voice low, almost swallowed by the air between us. Her eyes softened, the faintest glimmer of vulnerability flickering in their depths. "Neither should I," she whispered, her breath brushing against my cheek. "But—" She let the word hang, heavy and impossible to ignore. We stood there, suspended on the edge, the gap between us charged with all the things we hadn't said. My fingers itched to close it, to rest against her skin, to finally bridge the distance that had tormented both of us for weeks. Her gaze fell to my lips, then back to my eyes, and in that silent exchange, I felt everything: hesitation, desire, guilt, and longing, all at once. My hands rose slowly, trembling, until my fingertips just grazed the curve of her jaw. She leaned into it slightly, not fully, but enough that I could feel the warmth of her skin against my touch. "Are we—" I began, voice cracking under the weight of what we both wanted. "Yes," she breathed, barely audible, and the single word carried 1,000 promises and confessions. The hesitation, the fear, the shouldn'ts of the world melted away in that instant. I stepped closer, enough that our bodies brushed, shoulders pressing together lightly. The air between us became almost tangible, thick with everything unspoken. Her hand slid up to rest against my chest, heart hammering beneath her palm. I could feel every beat, every rapid thrum of nerves and anticipation. She tilted her head, lips a whisper from mine, and I caught a faint scent of her hair, soft and intoxicating. The choice had been made, silently, in the way we leaned into each other, in the way our breaths mingled and our eyes held. No words were necessary, everything had been said in a touch, a glance, a shared heartbeat. And then we closed the final inches. Our lips brushed lightly, a tentative, fragile kiss that held all the restraint of weeks of longing and the intensity of every unspoken thought. It wasn't perfect. It was messy, fumbling, human, but it was real. She pressed closer, and I wrapped my arm around her waist, holding her with a careful reverence, afraid to break the fragile world we'd created but unable to resist the pull any longer. The tension dissolved into warmth, into understanding, into something that was ours alone. When we finally pulled back slightly, just enough to breathe, our foreheads rested together. Eyes closed, we shared a silent acknowledgement. Desire had won, yes, but so had trust, patience, and recognition of the depth of each other's hearts. "I've never felt like this," she whispered. "Me neither," I admitted, voice low but certain. And in that quiet moment, suspended between fear and fulfillment, we finally understood each other fully, every flaw, every hesitation, every heartbeat that had led us to this. The room was quiet again, but this time it wasn't tense. It felt alive, charged with a calm intimacy, the kind that comes after a storm has passed and left only clarity behind. Elena leaned against me, her head resting lightly on my shoulder, and I could feel the slow, steady rise and fall of her chest. My arm wrapped around her waist almost automatically, a gentle hold that spoke more than words could. We didn't rush to speak. There was no need. Every small motion, a tilt of her head, the brush of her fingers along my hand, the way she adjusted closer without thinking, was a conversation in itself. The distance that had felt impossible only hours before had vanished, replaced with something real, messy, and entirely ours. "I was so afraid," she murmured after a long pause, voice soft but steady. "Of everything." I tightened my hold slightly, careful to let her feel the weight of my presence. "I know," I said, keeping my voice low. "Me too. But we made it here. Together." Her hand slid into mine, fingers intertwining naturally. The touch was simple, yet it carried the memory of every stolen glance, every hesitant brush, every heartbeat that had brought us to this point. I pressed a kiss to the top of her head, feeling the warmth of her hair against my lips, and she shivered, not from cold, but from the deep relief and connection that had finally settled between us. We stayed like that for a long while, not speaking, not moving, just existing together in a space that felt private and sacred. Outside the room, the world might still have had rules, judgments, and expectations, but here, in this quiet moment, none of that mattered. Age, hesitation, it all seems so small now, I said finally, voice barely more than a whisper. She lifted her head just enough to look at me, her eyes shining but calm. "It does," she agreed, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Because it's us. And that's enough." I pulled her closer for a long, lingering hug, feeling the warmth of her body, the rise and fall of her breathing. Every worry and doubt that had built between us melted in that embrace. It wasn't a perfect world, and it wasn't a perfect moment, but it was ours, human, and unshakably real. She rested her forehead against mine, our eyes closing in quiet contentment. The tension that had defined our days, weeks, and stolen hours was gone, replaced by something steady and true. We had crossed the line of fear into honesty, of desire into shared trust, and in that, there was freedom. And for the first time in a long time, I felt completely seen, and completely connected, to her, in a way that no hesitation, no social expectation, and no fear could undo. We stayed there, hands still intertwined, foreheads pressed together, letting the world outside fade until it was just us. And it felt like home. Did you enjoy the story? What kind of stories would you like to hear next?